Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining in on time for our April community call, Census 2020, Ensuring the SEAA Count. We're going to give folks a couple more minutes before we get started, and then we will go ahead and start soon. All right, thanks. All right, thanks everyone for your patience. We're going to go ahead and get started since we have a full call today and a lot of information to share. So again, this call will be focused on the 2020 census and how each of us can work to ensure the Southeast Asian American count for 2020. I'm joined today by Katrina Dizon-Mariategui, who is our Director of National Policy here at SEARAC, and Kelsey Hendrickson, who is our Operations Manager. So we're all on the call today to help get through all this info, and again, any logistical problems, feel free to just chat them to Kelsey. Speaking of logistics, just to give folks a few ground rules, all attendees are going to be placed on mute. Feel free to comment or make any questions, but you have to be logged into the actual webinar, not just calling in on your phone. You can send those questions on the panel. You'll see a questions box where you can submit those to Kelsey, who will get those to us. We'll try to address a lot of those at the end of the webinar, but if there are some relevant ones throughout, we can also touch base during the slides. And then you'll also find a handout section in your panel where you can download a copy of the presentation as well as some other resources that we can talk more about later. All right, so our first question, if you've been with us for a few community calls, you know this is the first question we always start with, is where are you joining us from today? So we have East Coast, West Coast, the Midwest, the South, or some other region. So we'll give folks a minute or two to answer and then see where folks are calling in from. All right, we'll go ahead and close the poll. So it looks like over half of you all are calling from the West Coast, so thank you for joining us around lunchtime, I guess. And then over a third are from the East Coast, and then about a tenth are from the South. So I guess we'll need to circulate this to our Midwest partners, but thanks to everyone who's on the call today. So our next question is, how many SEARAC community calls have you attended in the past? So anywhere from 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. 4 or more. Feel free to pick 4 for that one. We'll give folks a couple minutes and then we'll share out. All right, I'll give folks, okay, we're done. No, I'm just kidding. So let's see, we have, oh, okay, over 40%. This is your first call, so thank you for joining. Hopefully we get you to stick around for other calls. About a third of you have been to a 1, and then about 28% have been to 2 or more. So glad to have you all back. Thank you for letting us know. Hope to see you all again for the months to come. So we'll go over quickly our agenda for today's call. Again, this call is going to be focused on the 2020 census. So we will start off with just an overview of what the census is, so a 101 level. We'll then go into the impact on the Southeast Asian American community, about how you all can prepare for the 2020 census, go over some policy updates that are going to affect the 2020 census, and then talk about taking action, resources we can provide, and then open it up for Q&A. So without further ado, I will transition to Katrina for the Census 101 portion.
Thank you, Alyssa. So before we get started, we just want to do a few quick polls to just get a gauge of everybody's knowledge level on the census. So to kick things off, can folks just share, have you ever filled out the census before? So basically, if you could share yes, no, or I'm not sure, or basically if you don't remember. And we'll give folks a few seconds to fill that out. Great, everybody. Let's check out the results. So it looks about like half of you have filled it out and you recall that. That's great, with about almost 40% no and about 12% not quite sure. So thank you so much for sharing. For our next poll question, we just wanted to ask, for folks on the call, how much would you say you know about census? So either a lot, I'm practically an expert, a good amount, but I still need more information. A little, I need a lot more information. None, I need the basic 101, please break things down for me, or other. Great, thanks everybody for participating. So, wow, 17% of you guys are practically experts. So for those of you in the call that are experts, please feel free to share any information that you would like to share out with us, because, us here at SEARAC, we're still sort of learning this work at the moment. For those that said about almost 30%, a good amount, but still need more information, and it looks like a majority of you just know a little but need a lot more information. So I think hopefully this webinar can basically cover a lot of those needs. And for a small portion of you, you're saying that you definitely need the basic 101. So in this presentation, we're going to try to cover the basics, but also try to delve into a little bit more information. So hopefully we can address a lot of the questions that folks might still be having around the census. So to kick things off, in terms of what is the census, the census is basically a way for the U.S. government to count every single living person in the United States. It is mandated in our Constitution, and it's administered by the U.S. Census Bureau every 10 years, which might explain why some of those on the call may not have recalled the previous experience of filling it out, or you're not really quite sure, just because it happens only every 10 years. What will Census 2020 ask me? So this is a current list of questions that will be asked in the census questionnaire. And since the census seeks to count the number of living people in the United States, only one census form should be completed per household. So it's not necessarily per family, but basically you're trying to take into consideration the number of individuals living with you in your household. So for example, if you have roommates or you're living with others in your home that aren't necessarily like family members, that form must be filled out based on the information of those individuals who are living with you. So in the questionnaire, you'll be asked the number of people in your household, if you own or rent. It'll ask for your telephone number, and this will only be used for official census business. And then you'll have to fill out information on the name, sex, age, and date of birth of every single person living in your household, and also what your relationship to that person who is filling out that form is. There is also a question around race, and typically how it's laid out is there are checkboxes available for different ethnic groups, and then there's an option to basically write in if your ethnic group is not listed. And then lastly, it will ask about the Hispanic origin. And overall, ideally, this questionnaire shouldn't take very long to fill out. We get a question a lot around, is participating in the census safe? So federal law requires that everyone participate in the census and to answer all the questions asked. If you skip a question on your form, it'll still be counted. But if you skip several questions or one question, the chances or the likelihood of a census employee coming to your door to follow up are much higher. And as you know, there is a possibility that the census may include a question around citizenship, which many immigrants and those with deportation orders are very nervous about since they have a fear of being targeted by this administration. And unfortunately, we won't know for sure if that question will be added until a decision is made by the Supreme Court sometime this summer. However, you should know that there should be no question around immigration status overall. So for example, you shouldn't be asked to identify if you're here as a lawful permanent resident on a specific type of visa or if you're undocumented. So specific immigration status should not be asked on the citizenship question. And then in terms around if it's safe to disclose your data, for those that are nervous about participating in the census, you should know that your census answers should be confidential. Title 13 of the U.S. Code provides very strong confidentiality protections that prohibits the sharing of individual information with other government agencies, immigration officials, or the public. Census responses can only be used for statistical purposes. Title 13 also has very harsh consequences for people who violate census confidentiality. Basically, they could be fined, they could be jailed in prison for up to 5 years or fined up to $250,000 or both if found in violation. So next, I want to turn you all over to Alyssa, who will discuss the impact on the Southeast Asian American community.
Thanks, Katrina. So just talking about so what? So why are we hosting a webinar directly focused on census? So the first thing right off the bat is that census affects funding. So census data helps ensure that your family and community can thrive by directly affecting how more than $800 billion in federal funds are allocated yearly to communities. Your community could lose thousands of dollars a year for each uncounted person, and since the census happens only once every 10 years, this loss will happen every year through 2030, adding up to a lot of lost resources. So how do those federal funds benefit your community? They go to programs such as Medicaid and Medicare, SNAP, Head Start, Section 8 housing vouchers. They go to grants for things like special education and childcare. And they also provide funding for things like libraries, hospitals, highways. So schools, hospitals, and roads, I think everyone in our life has been affected by those things. So census will directly affect funding for that. So next, I just wanted to take a quick poll just to get everyone's estimates of, in total, roughly how much money do you think a community would lose out on for each uncounted person over the next 10 years? $2,500, $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000? So again, this is over the next 10 years. So we'll give folks a few seconds to give their best guesses. All right, let's see what folks think. Okay, so over half of you think 15,000, about 30% of you think 10,000, and then 5,000 and 2,500 are a bit lower. So the correct answer is actually $15,000 is a rough estimate for over the next 10 years per person, how much a community would lose out on. So it roughly has been approximated to be about $1,500 a person per year. So as you can see, that multiplies since the census will not be done again until 2030. So in conclusion, don't leave money on the table. Participate in the 2020 census to ensure those funding sources go to your communities. Next, census affects visibility. So census data is not only used to determine funding, but also to inform our decision makers on where to invest resources. So this population data can have a strong impact on your community because it affects planning and investment. So things like where to build new schools, how to plan out for housing needs, and what type of healthcare needs to prioritize are all things that the data will help inform. And when there is an accurate count, all of these things will be better, your community will be better visible so that decision makers can accurately know where to do these things. So all in all, participate in the 2020 census to make sure your community's needs are visible. Next, census affects political representation. So these population numbers will determine how many seats in the U.S. House of Representatives each state gets. They'll be used to redraw political districts at all levels of government if needed. It'll also protect voters against discrimination based on race, which has been a topic that's come up of recent elections. And it'll also make sure that jurisdictions provide language assistance to voters. So having all this data will help ensure your community's political power. So again, can't emphasize it enough, participate in the 2020 census. So every response matters to your community. Just to give a summary, it'll make sure you're not leaving money on the table. It'll make sure your community's needs are visible, and it'll make sure your community has the rightful political power that it serves. A term you'll be hearing a lot is going to be hard to count. So this refers to communities where people have been seen to not respond to the census, which can lead to a disproportionate undercount, where the number of people the census records is less than the actual number of people living in a community. Communities that are historically hard to count include racial and ethnic minorities, renters, people with limited English proficiency, immigrants, and small children. Today, roughly 1 in 5 Asian Americans and 1/3 of Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders live in hard to count neighborhoods, where there are greater challenges in finding stable and affordable housing, higher incidences of poverty and unemployment, lower educational attainment, and greater language barriers. An undercount will result in lost federal funding that could go towards addressing needs for the AA and HPI community. And it's important that each person's participation in the 2020 census will be ensured. So just to show everyone what the potential impact is in terms of geographically, I wanted to share some maps that we made with some data. So starting off in the Hmong population, you'll see on this map, from lightest to darkest is where the most of the population in hard to count tracts are. So the darkest shaded states, so Mississippi and West Virginia, you'll see that they have a large percentage of the Hmong community is in hard to count tracts. As you can see, there are Hmong populations in hard to count tracts in many, many states. So again, imagining in each of those states $15,000 per person for the next 10 years, over the next 10 years, it'll add up. So just wanted to illustrate that. So next we'll go to the Cambodian population. As you can see, there's a Northeast cluster, Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, where between 50 and 75% of the Cambodian population are in hard-to-count tracts. You also have Louisiana in that situation. Next, below them is the 25 to 50% tract. So California, Nevada, Arizona, Arkansas, Kansas, Ohio, Oklahoma, Georgia, Tennessee, Connecticut, and Delaware. So those states all have 25 to 50% of the Cambodian population in hard-to-count tracts. And again, even for those states that don't necessarily reach that 25% threshold, you can see it's widespread throughout the country where there are populations in hard-to-count tracts. Next, we'll move on to the Laotian community. So as you can see from the key, there aren't states that have measured more than 50% in hard-to-count tracts, but as you can see, between 25 and 50%, you have widespread population. So from Oregon, California, Nevada, that kind of southwest belt of Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, all have 25 to 50% in hard-to-count tracts. And then again, that Northeast cluster of New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island all have 25 to 50% in hard-to-count tracts as well. And then again, as you can see, if you're noticing a pattern, there are populations in hard-to-count tracts all throughout the country. So keeping that number again in mind of 1,500 per person per year in each of these states, that's going to add up and really impact the community. So we'll land on the Vietnamese population, which interestingly enough has all 50 states shaded. So that means every state would be losing money for an undercount. So the highest percentages fall in Massachusetts and Alaska. So that has between 51% to 75% in hard-to-count tracts. And then next would be New Jersey, Kentucky, Rhode Island, Arizona, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, New Hampshire, Louisiana, and New York, who fall between 25 and 50%. But as you can see, the rest of the country is also at risk of being undercounted as well. So all of this is just to illustrate the importance of being counted, because if you can imagine, every single one of those states has populations that are at risk of being undercounted from the Southeast Asian American community, and how that could potentially add up between now and 2030. So that was a lot of information we threw at you, but out of all of that, we also wanted to take time to learn from folks on the call which of the following messages resonated with you or resonates with your community the most regarding why the census is so important and urgent. So is it about how the data is critical for your family's future? Is it about ensuring your fair share of federal resources? Is it about your civic engagement and being part of being American? Is it about making sure your community is visible and heard, or is it about ensuring your political representation in Congress? So just pick the one that resonates the most. Doesn't mean you don't care about the others, but just the one that rings truest for you. And we'll give folks a couple more seconds to answer. All right, we'll close out and see where folks landed. All right, so 61% want to ensure that their community is visible and heard. Next highest was ensuring the fair share of federal resources, followed by political representation, and then critical for your family's future. And I know all of these aren't mutually exclusive either, so like being visible and heard affects other things as well. So I also wanted to give folks a chance to share what was second most resonant to them from those same points. So the same poll, but the one that resonates the second if you had to choose another choice. Please don't pick the same one as you did the first time. So we just want to see how we can tailor our messaging. All right, let's see what folks think. Okay, so there's a tie between ensuring fair share of resources and political representation, and then followed by visibility, being heard, and then part of being American as well. So these are all good to know. This is going to help us make sure that the messaging and the shareables that we make are resonant with the community. So thank you for letting us know. Next, we will talk about how you can prepare. So knowing now that it's April 2019, how do you prepare for the 2020 census? So just to give you all an idea of the timeline, it'll start in January of 2020 with the enumeration, which is just like a fancy word for counting of remote communities. So it's actually going to start in Alaska. And then starting in March 2020 is when census postcards will be sent to most homes. So that's 95% of households who will receive census invitations in the mail. That'll give you a code to then answer the census online. Every household will have the option to respond online, by mail, or by phone. And then only 20% of households will receive paper forms, though, primarily targeting areas with low internet connectivity. And then the Census Bureau will send a paper questionnaire to all households that have not responded in the fourth mailing. So it'll be a series of postcards, and then if you have not responded by the fourth mailing, that's when they'll have a postcard or the paper form sent to your household as well. Between May and July of 2020, census workers will visit addresses that did not complete the census questionnaire to collect information. It's important to note at that point too that you can still submit your information online or by phone at that period too. By the end of 2020, so in December, is when the census director is due to deliver the counts to the president. Next, we'll go over the options for responding to census. So as I mentioned, online is how most folks will be encouraged to submit their information. So like I mentioned, the mailed invitation will encourage folks to go online with their unique ID for their household. Online, it's going to be available in 12 non-English languages, which includes Vietnamese. The paper form is available only in Spanish and English, and this is only going to be sent to households if a home fails to respond after 3 mailings. By phone, people can also call a census questionnaire assistance line where you can get language assistance as well as provide your census information. And that'll be available in 12 non-English languages, including Vietnamese as well. So I'm going to then bring it back to Katrina for some policy updates.
Great, thank you so much, Alyssa. So I know there's been a lot of news going on around the census, so we just wanted to give folks some key updates around some policies we've been hearing around the 2020 census. So as many of you are aware, and I mentioned it earlier, there's an ongoing battle in our court system to decide if the Trump administration's request to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census questionnaire will be accepted or rejected. Early this month, a federal court in Maryland issued a decision to block the addition of a citizenship question to the 2020 census, supporting prior decisions made in New York and California courts. The case finally made it to the Supreme Court this Tuesday on April 23rd, where oral arguments commenced. While this was happening, a number of advocates actually rallied outside of the Supreme Court to highlight the potentially devastating impact of the citizenship question on many of our communities. According to experts, the addition of this question could lead to a 6.5 million undercount, which is a conservative estimate, and it would mainly be concentrated in urban areas with a high population of immigrant communities, leaving many white rural areas relatively untouched. This will have a huge bearing on which states are likely to gain or lose seats in the House of Representatives. According to research, the states that would likely be most negatively impacted if there was an undercount of non-citizens, it would be California and New York, who could potentially lose at least one congressional seat due to this undercount. And then if you take into consideration all non-citizens, and if they were completely disregarded altogether, we would expand the impact to include Texas and Florida, who could also potentially be states that would lose one congressional seat as well. I know a lot of folks are very nervous around this decision. A final decision by the Supreme Court should be made by the end of June of this year. So we'll continue to monitor that situation and keep folks posted. One good news around the advocacy piece is, if you recall from Alyssa's slide on ways to respond to the census, there was not a lot of Southeast Asian in-language translated materials, with the exception of Vietnamese, in terms of online and phone support. So just this past month, we got some good news from Congresswoman Lori Trahan's office, who is a representative from Lowell, Massachusetts. She is championing a letter to the Census Bureau to request additional funding to support with phone and online translation in Hmong, Lao, and Cambodian languages. While our Vietnamese community members are already slated to have this type of translation support available to them, the Congresswoman wants to ensure that the same support and resources are also available to other Southeast Asian American communities who are also limited English proficient. According to American Community Survey data that we have, 39.5% of Cambodian households, 32.9% of Hmong households, 37.6% of Lao households speak English less than very well. In addition, more than 14% of these communities live in poverty. Due to these challenges, it makes these communities particularly hard to reach and thus hard to count. Therefore, it is crucial that all reasonable measures must be taken to reduce language barriers that might otherwise prevent an accurate count from being performed in these communities. So we really thank Representative Trahan for her leadership, and later we'll talk about ways that you can engage to make sure that your representatives are also supporting in this effort. Finally, the Trump administration released their proposed budget for the 2020 census rollout in March of this year, and advocates are particularly concerned because their request is basically $2 billion short of what experts believe is needed to ensure an accurate count of all communities. In response to this, SEARAC and other civil rights advocates have written to appropriators on Capitol Hill to request $8.45 billion to ensure a full, fair, and accurate count. Taking into consideration the additional support that will be needed to reach out to our community members and elders who are limited English proficient and lack knowledge on how to fill out a census form, and or are also living in fear of deportation and being targeted by the Trump administration. So with that, I'll hand it back to Alyssa, who will go over some items in terms of what you can do to take action.
Great, thank you. So definitely you can get involved if you want to protect your community's ability to get counted. First, if you're a constituent, so Massachusetts, the 3rd District, you can thank Representative Trahan for her leadership. You can tell your members of Congress to sign on to that letter. The deadline is May 3rd. There was a recent action alert that we circulated in our listserv for that, if you want talking points, and that's also available on our website. You can follow us for more updates, so on social media via Twitter and Facebook. You can keep joining our monthly community calls. We'll have a piece on census, I think, recurring from now on, and then obviously our listserv. We also have a census pledge form that we've been circulating. The bit.ly link is listed there, so it's bit.ly/SEARAC Census Pledge, where you can let us know if you want to pledge to be counted and if you want to be more involved as part of our Census Ambassador Initiative. So while we have folks on the line, we just wanted to get a sense of if you all feel like you can pledge to be counted for the census in 2020. So yes, not sure, I still need more information, or no. We'll give folks a couple seconds. All right, let's see what people said. All right, so great. 93% of you say yes, and then only 7% still need more information. So for those 7% of folks, if you want to reach out to Katrina or myself after the call, feel free to get in touch. All right, so the next question I have for you all is if you're interested in becoming a census ambassador for 2020. So just a little bit of information. Ambassadors go the extra mile to ensure the community is counted by reaching out and educating community members on the importance of census, supporting with translation, or volunteering at organizations dedicated to getting out the count. So one or all of those types of things. You can say yes, not sure, I still need more info, or no. So we'll give folks a couple seconds as well. All right, let's see what people think. Okay, great. So 63% say yes. So definitely, if you fill out our census pledge form online, definitely note that and we can get in touch. 30% need more information, and then 7% maybe don't have capacity. So totally fine. We're just more excited that 93% want to get counted. So my last question for you all is, how much information do you want to see in our e-blast on census? Since we're most likely to send out our census materials and follow up via our listserv, we just wanted to get some feedback from those of you who may already be on it or are potentially interested in joining. So you have, I would like detailed information, less information with the option to click elsewhere for more, keep doing what we're doing, not sure, or not yet subscribe to our list. So we'll give folks a couple more seconds. All right, let's see what we have. Okay, great. So 35% keep doing what you're doing. And then less option with the option to click somewhere else is 29%. Some folks want detailed information, so we can definitely look into how we can provide that. And then some folks are just unsure and not yet subscribed. All right, so that helps us moving forward for sure. And then last but not least, I just wanted to go over the resources that you can find in your handout section. So one of the resources is Census 2010, Southeast Asian American Hard to Count data by county. So these are listed by county and throughout the U.S. with low census participation in the 2010 census. So you can use that to kind of see where maybe your home counties fall. We also have Census Scenarios. So this provides answers to some scenario questions that folks in your community or you or yourself might have on Census 2020. There's also a census messaging worksheet, which can help you craft your own message on census that will help you talk to your community members with what matters to you all. There's also a template for a Get Out the Count field and comms plan. So if you want to be more involved and create that, that's hopefully a useful template. And then just wanted to flag for folks that in this summer, we will be rolling out some education materials ourselves, so just stay tuned for that. All right, we managed to cover a lot in the first 40 minutes, so we have a good, healthy amount of time for questions. So I'll just pause here just to go over some logistics again. If you want to share your question verbally, go ahead and click the raise hand icon. It looks like a little hand in your control panel, and then we can let you know and your line will be unmuted. If you share out verbally, just share your name and try and keep it concise within 2 minutes or so. And then I'm sure we won't have a problem, but respecting other people's viewpoints. If you feel more comfortable, you can just submit your questions in the questions box on your control panel as well. And I think we have some that have already rolled in, so we can start with some existing ones.
Okay, so thanks for those that have been chatting your questions. The first question that we see, do you know how many questions must be answered for the form to be counted or accepted by the Bureau? So we do know, we do know that you don't have to answer every single question in order for your form to be counted. As we mentioned, though, that the more number of questions that you don't answer, the higher likelihood that someone would come by to your door to basically get that information from you. And specifically for those that are curious around like the citizenship question, like, you know, would I still be counted if I skip the citizenship question? Basically the answer is yes. The next question, is there a possibility to amend the proposed citizenship question? So I'm not quite sure what you mean by amend. So currently right now it's being debated in the Supreme Court if it will be added or not. So at this point there is a chance that it won't be added. The likelihood that it would be added, to be honest, based on the analysis we've been hearing, the likelihood of it being added are quite high, just based on the makeup of the Supreme Court and looking at how many conservative judges we currently have on the bench, especially with the addition of the last two judges under the Trump administration. So we do want to be honest with folks that we are anticipating that the likelihood of it being added would be high, but unfortunately at this point we can't 100% be sure until that decision is made in June. The next question. Do you know what languages will be represented? So I'm assuming, so for the paper form, it'll only be English and Spanish. I'm assuming folks are asking that for the online translation, which was I think 12 languages including Vietnamese. So the other languages would be, Alyssa?
Let's see. So I think if this is correct, they should be Spanish, Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Russian, Arabic, Tagalog, Polish, French, Haitian, Creole, Portuguese, and Japanese. So that's what information I have.
Oh, we have two people with their hand. Oh no. Oh, we have one person with their hand up. Let me see the name. Alberter Gillespie. So we're going to unmute you and feel free to just ask your question on the phone. Okay. Oh, yes.
Oh, okay. Hi, Alberta Gillespie. I'm calling from Minnesota. And we have a large Hmong population, so I just was curious if there's any specific things happening that to include our population, some of the data that you presented. Your organization, are you connecting to the Hmong population here in Minnesota?
Oh, we do have multiple partners out in Minnesota. I know our plan in terms of our census work is we want to sub-grant to partners around the country to help get out the count. Off the top of my head, I can't recall if we had a Minnesota partner that we'll be working with. Do you?
Yeah, we're still in the exploration phase of securing and like finalizing that list of sub-grant partners, but right now we are looking to definitely make sure that the Minnesota partners that we do have, at least one partner, I think, at least from Minnesota, because that's definitely one of the states that we know has a large Hmong population.
Okay.
And in fact, if you have recommendations as well as of like organizations that you think would be helpful for us to partner with in terms of our get out the count efforts, feel free to email Alyssa and I. We'd love to hear from you.
I will do that. I have organizations, and you may also know that we have a number of Hmong elected officials here in Minnesota. We also have our own Asian caucus, and this is the first year, so I think those will be great partners as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, we would love to hear who you've been working with for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
All right, so we have a question. What is your advice to those who want to encourage community members to participate in the census but are afraid of being targeted by the Trump administration?
So that's a really good question, and we do want to start bracing ourselves for it just so that we're prepared. We were told that in this situation, the best advice is just to first is to affirm the fears of those community members. The truth is we are living in an environment where this administration has tried to target community members, specifically those with old deportation orders. So the most important thing is basically to affirm that fear because it's a totally valid one. Another thing is to also let them know that, you know, ultimately it really is up to them to make that decision if they want to participate in the census or not. But we do try to emphasize the fact that, you know, in not participating in the census, they could be losing out in a lot of resources for their own families and communities. So for us, I think it's a matter of just really emphasizing the positives that could come out in terms of what they could gain in filling it out, and try to focus less on like the negative pieces of it, although it is important to basically validate that concern.
Yeah, so we also wanted to highlight that the protections that we mentioned on the call, so Title 13, which are the confidentiality protections where your information cannot be shared by the Census Bureau, other than like aggregate statistical data. So nothing where you would be identified as an individual. And then just the, again, reminder of the jail time of up to 5 years and then $250,000 fine for any Census Bureau that violates that. We also wanted to ensure folks that from our talks with our partners and on the national level that folks are being proactive and there are folks ready to defend everyone's legal protections if anything were to happen. So we're definitely anticipating, we definitely validate and affirm the fear that some folks are facing, but also wanted to be proactive in knowing that there are defenses that we can count on if things were to go awry.
So we have a few folks with their hands raised. May say Chow. Oh no. Oh, sorry. Isis Sky. We're going to unmute you right now if you want to ask your question. So I think you're unmuted.
Hi, this is Isis. I'm in San Francisco, and we have a large Vietnamese community out here. I guess I did ask the question about the citizenship. It is likely that it will be approved by the Supreme Court to go on the census, but the way the question is phrased right now is pretty invasive. You know, you even have to say what year you were naturalized if you were a naturalized citizen. So would there be any chance for advocacy around, you know, changing the question to just say, are you a citizen?
So it is my understanding that it might be difficult because the deadline for finalizing the questionnaire so the Census Bureau could start printing the forms is, that's the reason why they're trying to get this decision by the Supreme Court by the end of June, because I think immediately after they have to go into printing. So to be honest, I mean, I'm not 100% sure myself, but I feel like the advocacy window in terms of changing how it's phrased or what could be asked would be incredibly slim. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. How are you working with other complete count committees in other states or potentially counties?
Yeah, so we're still kind of in the drafting phase of our entire Get Out the Count plan, but we definitely wanted to keep the complete count committees on our radar. So right now, I definitely want to make sure that we have some sort of established relationship with them, in terms of them knowing who we are and having our email, because I do want to have some sort of calendar of events that like our partners in hard to count areas can reference in terms of census awareness events or being able to bridge that gap of our partners and their local complete count committees. So just knowing who we are and being able to connect them to our partners on the ground who might want them to help them spread census awareness. So right now that's still kind of in a drafting exploration phase in terms of how we want to engage with them meaningfully. But if you, anyone on the call has ideas of what's worked for them in the past or how they've engaged with them in the past, we're definitely open to hearing those ideas.
Looks like we have Judith Huerta with her hand raised. We're going to go ahead and try to unmute you if you want to ask your question on the phone. So you
hear
should
me?
be, yeah, we can hear you.
Hello. Oh, I think my hand was raised for a while, and but my question was, and I think you might have answered it at some point, somewhat. If they decide to add the citizenship question to it, could families choose to solely not answer that question? And with that, is there a likelihood that representatives would be coming knocking to the door to get that question answered?
Yeah, so to answer that, you can choose not to answer that question or any question on the census form. Like we mentioned though, the more questions you leave unanswered, the more likely an enumerator will follow up to collect that information. Whether or not that one question is going to prompt them to send out an enumerator, knowing how many non-responses they will have to follow up with much more missing information is hard for us to give a definitive answer. But to our understanding, it's just the more questions you leave unanswered is the higher likelihood. And that like they do have limited capacity in to some extent of like how they decide where to send folks to collect information. So I think our understanding, if you leave off that one question, it may not be a huge priority for them to follow up in person if there are other folks who are missing a lot more. Does that answer the question?
It does, and I think where I'm seeing it is more of a perspective of community organizing, and if this is the question that does go through, just doing advocacy through local organizations that would help inform the community on maybe solely not answering that question, answering everything else, but if they have a high number of what you said, if they have a high number of submissions that have not answered that question, then what would be the likelihood of them sending representatives to individuals to come and get that question answered?
Yeah, that's definitely something that has been mentioned when we have talked with partners as well. So even if folks don't answer that question, you know, if some people are pushing the message to kind of boycott that question, that could lead to some problems where they can still see that there are a lot of folks from a certain tract or area where that question isn't being answered. So that also, you know, we don't necessarily advocate for either direction of answering or not answering. So we're just kind of trying to get folks to answer as many as they feel comfortable and not necessarily not answering a question intentionally to avoid that.
Yeah, definitely see where you're going with that. Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And another question we have, how can interested folks find out more about becoming a SEARAC Census Ambassador? Great to hear. If you want to become more involved as a Census Ambassador, just fill out our online Census Pledge form. So again, that's bit.ly/SEARAC Census Pledge, and you can let us know there. And then we would get in touch with you to see how involved or how much capacity you have to help out. So definitely welcome all the help we can get. All right, so I think we're getting a lot of folks who are sending contact information who want to stay engaged or stay in touch. So unfortunately, the questions after the webinar ends are erased. So if you could just email your contact info directly to Katrina and myself after the webinar, that'd be super helpful. And we'll share out our email addresses at the end for you to do that. But thanks in advance for wanting to be engaged.
All right, we're not seeing any new questions, so I think we might just wrap up a little early. If there are no objections to that, we'll just end on a huge thank you to everyone. I know that was a lot of information in a short amount of time, but if you want any more information or want us to elaborate on anything, feel free to email us. Our emails are Katrina or Alyssa@SEARAC.org. Again, the handouts include a copy of this presentation, so feel free to review it on your own time again, and then we'll also be sharing out a recording of this webinar afterwards. So with that, we thank you again and hope to see you on our May community call. Thank you.